Starting at the Cultus Creek Campground, the summits of Bird Mountain and Sawtooth Mountain can be reached in a very day-hikeable 9-mile excursion with about 2,500 feet of climbing in total. There are 2 trailheads at this campground. Make sure you start at the Cultus Trail, which is the one closest to the road. The trailhead you do not want is the one that's farther inside the campground. Remember, Cultus, not Indian Heaven Trail. Fill out a wilderness permit here. If you happen across a friendly forest ranger, they will check to see that you filled out your wilderness permit. The trail enters the wilderness area pretty much immediately, and thus all the typical wilderness restrictions apply. Motorized things and things with wheels are typically forbidden. The trail doesn't waste any time climbing the ridge, by the way. The trail gains about 1,200 feet over 1.2 miles. It's not the worst as far as steep trail goes, but it is 1,000 feet a mile. And this certainly isn't a thru hiker's trail by any stretch of the imagination. I always bring a pair of waterproof pants with me in this area, especially around fall or early spring, as there is frequently water on the overgrown huckleberry leaves, and once your pants get soaking wet, the water runs down your socks and into your shoes, which isn't very much fun. While the Pacific Crest Trail just over the ridgeline is well groomed and typically doesn't suffer from this vegetation encroachment, these side trails will get you soaking wet even on a dry day. But not me. Thanks to my waterproof pants, my feet stayed dry all day. Speaking of the Pacific Crest Trail, the Cultus Trail intersects with it after the apex of the 1.2 mile climb. Upon encountering this sign, it's up to you to decide which peak you want to do first. Bird Mountain is to the left and Sawtooth Mountain is to the right. I started with Bird Mountain and proceeded to the left. I'm going to drop GPS coordinates for this in the description to the video because while there is no official trail to the top of Bird Mountain, there is a boot path most of the way up, and it's actually a little farther down the trail than where I started here. I'm walking north in the opposite direction in this video, but this is kind of what the general area where the boot path starts looks like. All right, back to the Bushwhack, which the bushwhacking will be similar with or without the boot path because it's all in the same part of the hill. Now, I looked carefully at a topo map and at the slope shading layers in Gaia to choose my route up the summit. And you should have those downloaded if you're going to bushwhack around up here. It's very helpful. There is a decently okay grade on a drainage on the northwest aspect of Bird Mountain that provides for relatively open bushwhack most of the way up. There's mostly chest-high vegetation and significant open areas. This is a gorgeously naturally gladed slope, and I'm honestly considering coming back with the backcountry skis this winter to check it out. It looks like it'd be great tree skiing. You just got to get in here. So if I do come back with skis, you can be assured there's going to be a video about it. Heading up the hill, stay on the climber's right of the seasonal creek in the center of the drainage. I hadn't found the boot path yet on my ascent, like I said before, and therefore I did have to cross over higher up the drainage. One thing I did find a lot of, by the way, was bear scat. I'm not sure what the bears are foraging for up here. There's a lot of berries, but maybe it was just the berries. But there are a lot of signs of ursine activity on the tree trunks and game trails crisscrossing this open glade. There is a wall of thick vegetation between the easy glade and the summit. The route kind of disappears, and I had to rely on my GPS to stay on track through here as I found a way through. It's yet another moment where I was glad I had my nylon pants on. It seemed impenetrable at times, but there is a way through all of it, and it's actually relatively short-lived as it opens up onto this hanging meadow that represents the final push to the summit. It should be pretty obvious where the summit is from here, but if you're not sure, it's to the right. There seems to be, at the very least, a faint boot path most of the way through the huckleberries leading up to the summit. It's certainly more than attainable by the time you get up here. It's clear that this summit actually sees a fair amount of climbers, both because it's a relatively easy, non-technical climb to the top, and it's only a little over a mile from the nearest gravel road. There was one other ham radio operator who summited it like 2 hours after me the day I was here, and I encountered 3 other folks by chance at a trail junction who had also summited it this day. I'm sure the view is quite lovely on a clear day, but it hadn't quite cleared up the day I was up here. That's okay, because the view isn't the only reason I climb these mountains anyway. Radio bands were in great condition on this particular Saturday. With my 10-watt radio and a 67-foot long wire antenna, I was able to make contacts into both New Zealand and Japan using Morse code. Overall, I made two-way contacts with a total of 33 people, all in Morse code, before I put my radio away because getting through to that many two-way exchanges in Morse code still a bit of a mental challenge for me. It's a lot of decoding. Check out my other YouTube channel, KD7QOW, for a more detailed video about the radio portion of these summit expeditions. There's not much to say about the pathway down this summit other than it's very similar to the way up, just in reverse. It is easy to get a little turned around though, so just remember to stay to the south side of the canyon, where you'll likely chance upon this very well-trodden boot path that I was talking about that makes for a much easier ascent than the bushwhacking I did on the way up. Like I said, I'll put GPS coordinates for this in the description to this video. Once back on the Pacific Crest Trail, turn right and proceed for about a third of a mile until arriving back at the intersection with the Cultus Trail. But don't go back to the car yet. Stay to the left and continue the hike up Sawtooth Mountain. Although it's a longer distance to Sawtooth Mountain from this intersection than it is back to the car, this is the Pacific Crest Trail, so the miles disappear quickly. Thanks to the tireless work of the PCTA, the Pacific Crest Trail is in fantastic shape pretty consistently. And with the nice wide tread, clear corridor, and gentle grading, you can really keep up a pretty fast walking pace on this. There's a reason thru hikers can do 20 miles a day on this trail. It's because the construction of this trail supports that. After a couple miles on the PCT, I encountered the intersection with the Sawtooth Trail, which gains about 500 feet to the next summit destination. The Sawtooth Trail is a side excursion from the PCT and as such is not as well trodden or cared for, but it is by no means an abandoned track. Like most of the trails around here, it's in great shape for a wilderness trail. It's also not too long before the track opens up onto the first exposure, revealing the summit of Sawtooth Mountain. Once the trail obtains the ridge and opens up onto this view, it's not far to where the bushwhack starts. The conical thing in the center of the photo here is Lone Butte. I'll activate that one of these days. This boot path does not lead to the activation zone. This one the first boot path you're going to see here, at least not unsupported. You could get to the summit using this route, but it shouldn't be attempted without proper climbing gear and knowledge, neither of which I had this day. Whether using Onyx or Gaia GPS or whatever mapping app, make sure you've downloaded the slope shading layer before heading up here, especially Sawtooth. That's how I was able to figure out that I needed to punch into the woods at this point, kind of on the northwest side of the mountain. I'll leave GPS coordinates for this in the description as well, but it's important for anyone attempting this to have the knowledge in their hands as well. Don't just take my word for it. Make sure that you've got a map and that you agree with my judgment. It's possible that there may be a better route up this thing. I just haven't found it yet. The bushwhack itself is relatively brushy, but its most distinguishing feature is the steepness. It's not showing on the GoPro, it never does, but it is hard to believe that a forest can exist on terrain this steep. But here we are. The other folks I saw bushwhacking around up here had micro spikes on their hiking boots, and I thought in retrospect, that's a great idea. A pair of corks would have been nice on this terrain. It's slippery and terrifying. Regarding the terrifying nature of this climb, it is possible to just barely get into what we call the activation zone for summits on the air, which is just far up enough to get to where we can get points for activating the summit, which means we get points for making contacts from the summit. For those of you looking to do a true summit, for you climbers out there, there is no way to truly summit this without support. Not that I found. By support, I mean climbing ropes that are tied to things and or whatever it is climbers do to make so they don't die if they fail to execute a maneuver. So from the direction that I was approaching this, there were too many no-fall maneuvers, which would be you can't fall, right? You fall, you die, or you have to get rescued. So I was alone and I wasn't going to take any chances, but I'm just letting you know, you probably need to do this supported, either, or at least be an expert route finder. So I'm not saying it's not possible. There are probably people who are better than me that could have found a way. I am now seriously considering learning at least enough about rock climbing to ascend things like this. But for this trip, the only support I had with me was my better judgment. I tried making a contact with my handheld VHF radio, but the only person I got was the other ham radio guy who ascended Bird Mountain 2 hours after me. So hey, we got a summit to summit contact that worked. So we're lucky we got each other. But summits on the air require us 4 two-way contacts to qualify a summit for the points. So if I wanted to earn my 6 points, I was going to need to set up a radio that works on the shortwave frequencies that can reflect off the sky. And that is a lot easier said than done on this summit. It's hard to really illustrate how steep this is. Again, GoPro just kind of flattens terrain out, but just know that I had to keep my foot propped against that tree so that I didn't go sliding down the hill on my rear end. Ideally, I'd be able to set up a minimum 10-meter long wire antenna in order to get my signal out, but that was just not possible to do in any reasonably safe manner. So I had to use a specially designed short and compromised antenna and kind of hope for the best. It worked. I made 6 two-way contacts in total, so I got my 6 points. I could have actually played around with the radio a bit more, trying some other frequencies, but then I noticed that there were rocks tumbling down from above me. I was like noticing something falling on the ground. I'm like, what's that? What was that? Is that a pine cone? No, it wasn't a pine cone. There's rocks coming from the mountains above me. So add a climbing helmet to the gear list for activating this summit. There's rockfall. You're in the kill zone over here. I made the decision to get out of there as quickly as I could, and as quickly as I could turned out to be very slowly because descending this hill is even more precarious than climbing it. So I figured falling down the hill was the more present danger than getting bombed from above by a falling rock. Anyway, I found myself needing to shorten my trekking poles as short as they would go, and even having to hike down backwards in a few places. That's an old trick if you're having trouble staying stable, is to actually turn around and go down the hill backwards. I really wished it had snow on it. If this had snow on it, I could have just skied down it without incident, assuming that it didn't avalanche. Anyway, this would be an easy place to sprain or break something. I was in much more immediate danger on this less impressive looking summit under trees than I ever was the entire time I was climbing Mount St. Helens in the winter, or any time I've been on Mount Hood. I'm telling you, alpine terrain with snow on it is relatively simple. This kind of stuff, on the other hand, is just as steep, but more complicated, slippery in different ways. You can't make footholds. So, oh, by the way, there's nothing obstructing rocks tumbling from the summit. They come down right through the trees. I was unknowingly, when on the way up this, I didn't realize I was in the kill zone the entire time I was climbing this. I mean, I at least knew I was in the kill zone on the way down. Although knowing that didn't do me any good at this point. The only thing that would have done me good was safety gear, a helmet. Bring a helmet. Again, bring a helmet to this slope, to this mountain. I'm not joking. I'd like to take this moment to thank all my Patreon supporters, especially my Low Me Goodness level sponsors, Charles Kim and Ellie West. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, Edward Lanton, Bryce Ulrich, and Devin Young. If you'd like to join this list of folks supporting the creating of informative content that hopefully helps you find fun things to do outside, not just me showing you myself doing fun. Like, I try to actually give you some useful information instead of just pointing the camera at my pretty face and showing me doing stuff you wish you were doing. I want you to get out there. So anyway, navigate to my Patreon page and become a supporter. Now, get out there and, go climb something, I guess. Go play with your radio, go climb something.